Welcome to Band Tier. This is the channel where we discuss some of my favorite bands, and I rank their discographies so you guys know where to start. And in this video, we're going to be talking about one of the most famous metal bands of all time, Metallica. Metallica are a band that need no introduction. Founded in 1981 by vocalist James Hetfield and drummer Lars Ulrich, Metallica would forever shift the landscape of heavy metal music, becoming arguably the most successful metal band of all time. They've sold over 125 million albums worldwide. Metallica were a pioneer of the thrash metal genre with their earlier stuff, and later on they went to create a more mainstream sound that, while alienated some older fans, also allowed a lot of new people to discover this great band. It's pretty hard to find someone who can't name at least one Metallica song. Even people who aren't into rock and metal music will be able to rock out songs like Enter Sandman, Sad But True, and Nothing Else Matters. And they also have older material that will really satisfy the metalheads, songs like Master of Puppets. Metallica have had a wild 40-year career, with creating some of the best albums ever written and some of the worst albums ever written. They have 10 studio albums. I'm not going to cover the covers albums, so Garage Inc., any of the live albums, or Lulu. So I'm just going to cover the 10 studio albums. In part 1, I'm going to cover the first 5 Metallica albums. Those are Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, And Justice for All, and the Black Album. And in part 2, I'm going to cover the last 5 Metallica albums, which are Load, Reload, Saint Anger, Death Magnetic, and Hardwired to Self-Destruct. I'm going to put these albums in a tier list as we go, so you guys see how I think they stack up to each other. And unlike the last video series I did on Opeth, where it was pretty top-heavy, this one's going to be all over the board. So let's get right into it with their debut album going all the way back to 1983, Kill 'Em All. Metallica's 1983 debut, Kill 'Em All, is one of the most legendary albums in the world of heavy metal music. It's often credited as one of the essential albums in thrash metal, as it really helped that subgenre explode in its popularity. But putting aside the huge impact this album made on music, and strictly looking at the quality of the songs, how does it hold up? Kill 'Em All has aged extraordinarily well, and to this day, this album still absolutely rocks. The creation of this album was not an easy one. The original name for it was going to be Metal Up Your Ass, but that was scrapped for the more palatable name of Kill 'Em All. The original lineup consisted of vocalist James Hetfield, guitarist Dave Mustaine, drummer Lars Ulrich, and bass player Cliff Burton. However, Dave Mustaine would be fired from Metallica during the making of this album due to his alcohol abuse, and he would be replaced by guitarist Kirk Hammett from the band Exodus. Dave Mustaine would go on to form Megadeth, another titan in the world of heavy metal music and one of the big four of thrash. Kill 'Em All is a lot more thrashy than the other Metallica albums, and it really has an indie garage band feel. You can tell that these guys were just making some music and having a blast doing it. The album opens with Hit the Lights. This is an energetic song that opens up with some cymbal rolls from Lars before going right into a classic Metallica riff. This song also shows a lot of influence from punk rock, which as someone who is a massive fan of punk rock, is pretty cool to see. And just like always, Kirk Hammett really lays down some great solos on here. It's a great album opener that shows you what this band and what this album is going to be all about. Track number 2, titled The Four Horsemen, is my favorite on the album, and just plain one of my favorite Metallica songs, period. It expresses the raw feel that the later Metallica albums don't really catch. James' vocals have a lot less melody here than the later stuff, but there are some really great screamed verses before that super catchy chorus that will get entire stadiums of people at concerts singing along comes in. Also, do I even need to mention the main riff? That is awesome, and it also is probably the most fun riff on the planet to play on the guitar. Cliff Burton also does an incredible job with the bass on this, coming really clear through the mix and adding great depth to all the guitar riffs. The Four Horsemen is definitely a personal favorite of mine from Metallica. Motor Breath, Whiplash, and No Remorse are some more great songs that also show the true thrash side of Metallica. The chaotic drumming, chugging riffs, and of course the wonderful solos from Kirk Hammett just make these super fun, enjoyable listens. Without a doubt, the most unique track on here is Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth. Not many bands out there do a full instrumental track on their albums, but very few include an instrumental track that is just a bass solo on their album. And the best part is, it totally works. Anesthesia is awesome. It truly shows off how talented of a man Cliff Burton was as a bass player, and it's one of the reasons why he has such a legendary status in the world of heavy metal music. The most well-known, and certainly the most played song on Kill 'Em All, would be Seek and Destroy. There is a reason this song is so popular. It's got one of the most iconic riffs in music, but what really makes it such a staple in my opinion is how anthemic it is. This is a song begging to be played for arenas filled with tens of thousands of people. That chant of searching, seek and destroy is a staple of any Metallica concert, and this song is often extended well past its original length at the band's live shows. It's a true classic of heavy metal. As far as debut albums go, Kill 'Em All is fantastic. It really kick-started the push of people getting into thrash metal music at the beginning of the 80s, and it was the starting point for what would become one of the biggest bands in the world of any genre. And it's really cool to see, look back on Kill 'Em All when it was just a band, like a bunch of guys getting together, having some fun, playing in their garage, and then to see what that turned into later on. And the music still holds up. I mean, songs like The Four Horsemen, Seek and Destroy, Hit the Lights, all classics, great Metallica songs. Overall, Kill 'Em All is great. I don't really have much bad to say about this album at all. Overall, I'm going to put Kill 'Em All in A tier. I think this was a great start to what will become a phenomenal band, and I think there's some really great stuff on here. It's different from the rest of the Metallica albums. Any Metallica stuff after this is going to be a lot more melodic, and I definitely think James, his vocals here are not quite as good as they would become. But that has its kind of pros because it's a lot more raw and aggressive than the other Metallica albums, and it has that feel with everything, the instruments too. This feels like a true garage album, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it really works. If I was giving someone a Metallica album to start with, this is not the one that I would give them. I can see how the sound this album has might alienate some people who aren't really into the heavy side of music, but overall for me, as far as this Kill 'Em All is concerned, I love it. I think it's a fantastic album, and probably one of the better debut albums in heavy metal music.
When people talk about their favorite Metallica albums, 1984's Ride the Lightning comes up pretty frequently, and for good reason. This is one of the most iconic albums Metallica put out, and played is one of the most iconic metal albums ever. Almost 40 years have passed since the release of it, and songs on here, at least before the pandemic, still get played live very frequently. Ride the Lightning is a very strong album, and overall I think it is a step up from the debut Kill 'Em All. The production here is much better, the band sounds a lot more focused and interested in making the record, and while it still thrashes, it overall has a more melodic sound, which I think suits Metallica better. James' vocals are also much better here, and overall this is just pretty much Kill 'Em All, but better in pretty much every way. The beginning of Ride the Lightning is where I think it is the strongest, and my favorite song in this album is actually the opening track, Fight Fire with Fire. It starts off with an acoustic section before entering full Metallica glory with a main riff that's impossible not to add back here. It's pure thrash and speed, and it makes pretty much the perfect opening for this album. It sets the stage for everything Ride the Lightning is going to be. Another one of my favorites on here is the title track. This is just one of those songs that screams Metallica. Lyrically, it's pretty dark. It tells the story of a man who is being executed by the electric chair. The vocal delivery is harsh here, but it still feels more polished than on, say, something like The Four Horsemen off of Kill 'Em All. And man, is that intro riff just awesome. For Whom the Bell Tolls is one of the most famous Metallica songs ever, and while personally it's not my favorite, and I think it's a bit overplayed, it's got the arena rock aura that just cannot be denied. This is a song that is meant to be played live for crowds of thousands of people. And I mean, plus that bass line from Cliff Burton, I mean, come on. Fade to Black is a certified Metallica classic, and for good reason. The first part of the song is rather soft, while it speeds up in the latter half. Only a few seconds in is one of my favorite guitar solos ever. It does not feature the technical shredding that makes Kirk Hammett so well known, but it exudes emotion out of every single note, and this entire song follows that. James shines in his softer vocal delivery, and I think he does an amazing job on this song. This is an absolute classic and is one of the songs that helped push Metallica into the mainstream, and to this day is a pretty good contender for the most well-known Metallica song. Trapped Under Ice leads right back into the thrash. This is an underrated deep cut. I think it's overlooked just because of how strong this album is, but honestly it's one of the better tracks on here. Several awesome solos can be found on it, and it's got a chorus that's just really awesome to chant along. After Trapped Under Ice, we get into Escape, which is honestly a pretty weak song. I'm not really going to talk much about it. And then we head into Creeping Death, which is a Metallica classic. This is a 6-minute track with biblical plagues that it just feels like an absolute epic song. I honestly didn't like this one too much at first, but over the years it's grown on me and it continues to grow on me. This is a live staple for a good reason. Like For Whom the Bell Tolls, this is a song that's designed to be played for massive crowds of people. This album closes on the perfect note with the instrumental track, The Call of Cthulhu. I love this song. Bands that can do full instrumental tracks that keep your attention are a rarity, and Metallica have several in their discography. This one has a clean opening with a creepy riff to set the mood before entering a sea of great guitar work. Lars actually does a really good job on the drums here, and his crash hits make the track feel huge. And the even better version, if you look at their live concert, S&M, when they did this song with a full orchestra, that was awesome. That's one of my favorite Metallica performances ever. And this song overall is one of my favorite Metallica songs, and I'd say it's a contender up with the opening track, Fight Fire with Fire, and the title track for my favorite song on Ride the Lightning.
Ride the Lightning is a fantastic album. I know that's not an unpopular opinion by any means, but hey, great albums are great albums. I don't think it's perfect. It does have some flaws. I'm not a big fan of Escape, and For Whom the Bell Tolls has kind of gotten old over time for me, but I mean, this is just a classic in the metal world. It's a big improvement over Kill 'Em All, in my opinion. It's already a very strong album. And it's the album where I think Metallica really discovered the sound that did them so well in the 80s that they would continue to refine later on through the decade. It's a great album and one that I think every metal fan should definitely listen to.
Ride the Lightning is an album that sits on the borderline between an A-tier album and an S-tier album, but I think I'm going to put it in A tier. For me, this album is very solid from front to back. Overall, it's a great album. It's got a couple missed spots, like Escape, and For Whom the Bell Tolls, good song. A lot of people really love that song, but for me, I don't know. It just doesn't kind of hit the same. It hits a lot of people. This album explores a lot darker lyrical themes than the previous album did, and overall, I think it has a much more refined sound. It sounds a lot better than Kill 'Em All does, and the songs definitely improved on here. And I still think Metallica, through the rest of this decade, would continue to produce some better music. So that's why I don't have this in S tier. Most bands, this would easily be an S tier album, but the top tier Metallica stuff is so good that, I don't know, it just feels weird to put Ride the Lightning up with an album like, I don't know, say the next one we're going to talk about, Master of Puppets.
I mean, do I even need to talk about this album, guys? Master of Puppets is the album that sent Metallica from a really well-known band that was dominating the metal scene to a world-dominating, multi-genre spectacle. Front to back, this is one of the best albums I've ever listened to from any band across any genre. I've spun this thing so many times I can't even tell you, but each listen it still feels new and refreshing. Now, I gotta address the elephant in the room here. Unfortunately, this would be the last album to feature bass player Cliff Burton, who would tragically die in a bus crash while on the road touring in support of this album. The world lost a young and truly talented man. However, If there is a positive, which I mean, there really isn't, Cliff Burton went out on the best note possible, giving, in my opinion, his best bass performances, and I mean, he's on one of the greatest metal albums of all time. The songwriting here is much more mature than the previous two albums, and the hooks are just infectious on every song. It's a perfect balance of melody and thrash that's really heavy and you can just rock out to, but it's also super easy to listen to. You can spin this thing again and again and again. And that's what I think makes Master of Puppets such a flawless masterpiece. This is one of those albums where I can't really talk about the highlights in the form of best songs to listen to, because the best songs of this album is the whole thing. So I'm just going to go front to back, talk about why I love every single one of these songs, because this is an album that, I mean, you've probably listened to it, but if you haven't listened to it, it's one you've got to listen to. Battery is the opener of this album, and it gives you a taste of everything you're about to experience. It starts with a dual acoustic guitar intro before slamming you in the face with some awesome riffs. James' vocals are harsh here, and the song just makes you want to get up and move. That chorus will have you chanting back to re along, and it just practically begs that out of you. Kurt's guitar shredding here is top notch, and in my opinion, there really isn't much better of an album opener out there. Track number 2 is the mammoth title track that is without a doubt the signature Metallica song. This is the banner anthem for the band, and this 8-minute beast pretty much just sums up everything amazing about Metallica and heavy metal music in general in one package. That opening downstroke riff is probably one of the most recognizable riffs from any band. Again, the hooks here are just so catchy. The song changes things up in the middle with a little Queen section and a wonderful guitar solo from James Hetfield. And Kirk's final guitar solo, my god, perfection. This song is pretty much any metalhead will tell you to listen to if they're trying to get you into heavy metal music, and for good reason. It's incredible. One of my favorite songs ever. The Thing That Should Not Be is a bit of an overlooked song. It's a bit slower than the first two on this album, which I think might be why, but it really shows off the drumming ability of Lars Ulrich. His crash hits and tom patterns are the driving force here, and it's another great song. There isn't a moment of filler on this album. My favorite Metallica song ever is track number 4, Welcome Home, Sanitarium. Lyrically, this is Metallica at their best, describing someone with a mental illness who is trapped because the society around them just sees them as insane. James' vocals have a sense of desperation and so much emotion in them, and every guitar solo here just rocks. The second half is a lot heavier than the first half, which is more like a ballad, and you can just feel the anger in that part. This is an absolute masterpiece, and I cannot count how many times I've listened to this song. It's just one of my all-time favorites. Disposable Heroes is another 8-minute epic. This song is an anti-war anthem, with a driving bass line from Cliff Burton and some more great drumming from Lars. Again, this is another song full of great moments. That chorus chant of "Back to the Front" especially. Leper Messiah is another song that's really great lyrically. It talks about the corruption in Christianity and how many of these megachurches that claim to spread a dogma of love prey upon the people who are at the lowest points of their lives, seeing these pastors as their leper messiahs. Great tune. God, Orion is such a phenomenal song. Just listen to a stripped out bass track and you'll get an idea of how good it is. This song was actually played at Cliff Burton's funeral, and man, it's easy to see why. Every bass player on earth needs to listen to this thing. It's probably Metallica's best instrumental, and again, like, just the bass work on this is incredible. That solo in the middle, absolute fire. Finally, we have the closing track, Damage Incorporated. And just like the opening song, Battery, this one is just pure thrash. It's just riff after riff that'll leave you headbanging. And the end of the song just abruptly ends, and you're just left sitting there in awe at the last 54 minutes of music you listened to. Master of Puppets is something that everyone needs to experience, regardless of what genre you're into. You'll probably love this album. I've played this album for people who aren't really, big metal fans, and they still ended up loving it. For me, there's some great Metallica albums out there. Ride the Lightning, that's a really good one, and Justice for All, which we're going to get to next, another phenomenal album. But for me, nothing touches Master of Puppets. It's always been the Metallica album that I think of as their crown jewel, and if we're talking albums, I don't know if this is my favorite album of all time, but it's up there. It's one of the albums that I go back to the most, and no matter what mood I'm in, it's something I can listen to. From front to back, or from back to the front, this album is just, it's perfect. There's not really much else that can be said about it. If you haven't listened to it, I mean, most of you probably listened to this album. It's very famous for a good reason, but if you haven't listened to this one, stop the video right now and just put this thing on, and I assure you, you will not be disappointed by it. Yeah, there's absolutely no argument that can be made for anything other than S tier for Master of Puppets. This album isn't just an S-tier album, it's an album that defines what an S-tier album is for me. It's an album that when I listen to a new metal album, I often use Master of Puppets as a benchmark of a great one. Every song on here hits, from the softer ballads like Welcome Home Sanitarium to just the brutal thrashing of something like Battery or Damage Incorporated, just to the epics of, Master Puppets and Disposable Heroes. Orion, amazing instrumental song. There's something on this album for everyone, and for me, when I think of Metallica, this is the first thing that comes to mind. This is one of my favorite albums, period, and I just, there's not an argument to be made. This is an S-tier album. If you take one thing away from this video, go listen to Master of Puppets. If you've already listened to Master of Puppets before, just listen to it again. It's one of those albums that has so much replay value to it. This is just an all-time classic record, and, I mean, there's not much more that can be said. Just, once again, go listen to Master of Puppets. "1988's And Justice for All is the fourth album from Metallica. After the death of Cliff Burton, they grabbed bassist Jason Newsted to fill in. However, one thing people often mention about this record is the lack of bass. This is true. As an initiation for the band, they turned Newsted's bass playing really low down, and you can't even hear it in the mix. This actually doesn't have a negative impact on the quality of the album, and I think it overall gives it a unique feel. This is probably Metallica at their most technically proficient. It's got longer and much more challenging songs than the previous three albums. And lyrically, this one talks about political and legal injustices, hence the name, And Justice for All. And Justice for All is definitely more of a challenging listen than a lot of the other Metallica albums, I'd say, of their 80s stuff. This is the one you gotta sit down and kind of take in, because it really is a lot. That being said, I think this one is absolutely fantastic, and just like Master of Puppets, I would say that this is pretty much a perfect 10 out of 10 front to back album. Blackened is the opening track to this album, and just like Fight Fire with Fire and Battery, this is proof Metallica know how to open an album really strong. It's just a slew of double bass and amazing riffs, and it still has a really catchy chorus despite the song being very technically challenging. The title track is another just great song. Lars Ulrich is a peak performance on this album, and this song is perfect evidence of that. He really does play some amazing fills and just fits perfectly here. Lyrically, the song talks about the failures of the criminal justice system, and much of those lyrics still hold up today, over 30 years later. Eye of the Beholder is another great song full of chugging riffs and a great solo from Kirk Hammett. And this leads into one, which I hate to be typical, but this is my favorite song on the album. It talks about a man who has been physically destroyed by war, and how he feels trapped in his own body by his injuries. It's quite a disturbing concept, but it's executed very well. This one starts off slower before letting it all loose in the second half. And need I even mention that guitar solo here? It's probably my favorite solo Kirk Hammett has ever done. The Shortest Straw is another great track that leads into Harvester of Sorrow. This song has to have one of my favorite main riffs of any Metallica song. I mean, that is designed to be headbanged to. Not quite as technical as the rest of this album, but I love it nonetheless. The Frayed Ends of Sanity is a personal favorite of mine. I mean, that tapping solo alone should be enough to make you fall in love with this song. The main riff also just has so much groove. It's an overlooked gem that I really recommend going back to if you haven't spun this album in a while. To Live Is To Die is the instrumental track here, and I do like this one, but it's definitely not as strong as Orion or The Call of Cthulhu from Master of Puppets and Ride the Light, respectively. It still fits into this album wonderfully, though, and that leads us to the closing track, Dyer's Eye. This is more of a classic Metallica 80s thrash sound. It really ends the album with a bang, and this is the last thrash metal Metallica song that we'll get for a while. So I do think that this is a pretty strong album closer, although it's not one of my favorites on here or anything. Overall, And Justice for All is a really good album. This isn't where I'd start if I was getting into Metallica by any means, because this can be a bit of a challenging listen. It's a long album, and it's not quite as fun as the previous three Metallica albums, if that makes any sense. But this is Metallica musically at their best. It's got some really, really good instrumentation, especially Kirk Hammett. Some of his best solos can be found on here, and Lars Ulrich really does a great job. drumming. It sounds different from all the other Metallica albums. So yeah, I love And Justice for All, and I think that this is one of the best albums Metallica have put out. Definitely top 2. And Justice for All is another S tier album. Well, it's not quite as good as Master Puppets in my opinion. I can certainly see the argument someone could make that this is the best Metallica album. I'd say musically, this is Metallica at their strongest. There are some of the best guitar solos they've ever done here. Lyrically, this album, is written very, very well. And I like that it has a common theme, and a lot of the issues this album talks about were relevant back in 1988, and they're still relevant today. And several of these are great live staples. If I had one, and this isn't really a complaint, this is just something with the album, it would be kind of nice if you could hear the bass, but it doesn't take away from it that much. Overall, I'd still say that this is front to back a pretty much perfect album. Would I start here if you're trying to get into Metallica? No. I would say if you're trying to get into Metallica, listen to Master Puppets and Ride the Lightning, even the Black Album, before you listen to this one. But still, great album, one of my favorites for sure, and once you're kind of accustomed to the way Metallica sound, 100% give this one a listen. The Black Album is without question Metallica's most commercially successful album, and honestly it's probably the most commercially successful metal album ever written. This thing went diamond, selling over 15 million copies, and it's been on the Billboard 200 ever since its release. Even today, many of the songs on here still get extensive radio play, such as Enter Sandman, Sad But True, and Nothing Else Matters. These are songs that pretty much anyone, regardless of what genre you listen to, will recognize when they come on. This album's commercial success was extremely impressive, but despite that, many Metallica fans don't really care for this one. The complaint I often see is that Metallica is sold out on the Black Album. I can kinda see where they're coming from. This album is a lot less heavy and more radio-friendly than the previous four. This isn't really a thrash metal album, it's more groovy. I would also not say this album is anything amazing from start to finish like the last three, and especially compared to Master Puppets and Justice for All. But most of the songs on here do really well. Probably the most famous Metallica song ever is Enter Sandman, and this one is just plain fun. It's got a great riff, it's got some good solos, it's catchy, and this is one of those songs that's designed to be played for arenas. This is like a classic arena rock song. I wouldn't call it one of Metallica's best or anything, but it is pretty good. I kind of feel like I have to talk about Sad But True. This is another one of those classic Metallica songs that's honestly probably almost as well known as Enter Sandman, but it just never really stuck with me. There's nothing inherently wrong with the song, many people love it, but I don't know, it never stood out to me really. Maybe I've just heard it one too many times, but considering how well this album did and how many people like this song, even people who aren't huge fans of the Black Album tend to like this song, you'll probably end up liking it too if you listen to it. My favorite song on the Black Album is the one that follows it, Holier Than Thou. This is another song that is very critical of religion, and what I love about this one is its mix of heaviness and groove. It kind of feels like a mix of the 80s Metallica albums with the 90s Metallica albums, and that's something that I really like. I think that this song is a gem that often gets overlooked for some of the singles on this album, so I think you should definitely give this one a chance. One thing the Black Album does really well is the ballads, and this is evident in two of the tracks on here, which are, again, massive radio singles, Unforgiven and Nothing Else Matters. Of the big hits of this album, these are my two favorites. I love the almost western vibe of the main riff of the Unforgiven, and the song is just plain fun. Nothing Else Matters, though, is the one that really stands out to me. This is one of the first Metallica songs that I listened to, so I'm a bit biased, but I do think it's fantastic. They actually had no intention of recording this one, but it's a good thing they did, as it became an instant classic and is one of the most recognizable Metallica songs. Of how they took a much simpler song and still made it really good. That's something that shows you got true talent, is if you can still sound really good without, the crazy shredding and double bass. And they did a great job here. This is one of my personal favorite Metallica songs.
Never opened myself this way.
Overall, the Black Album's commercial success cannot be denied, and honestly, that's kind of what I feel like this album was this was an album that was made for the masses. But Metallica, they did need to evolve their sound because they had kind of been doing the same, that thrash metal stuff in the 80s, and in my opinion, that's the best Metallica stuff, and really, it's all downhill from here. That being said, the Black Album is still a good album, maybe even a great album. It's got a lot of good stuff. The radio singles are really good, most of them. I have, Enter Sandman, that's a classic. It's kind of a guilty pleasure song for me, because a lot of Metallica fans don't like that one, but I really enjoy it. Nothing Else Matters, that's one of my personal favorites. The Unforgiving is really good, too. Holier Than Thou, that's just a phenomenal song. The God That Failed is a pretty good one. Now, this album, I think, has a lot of filler on it as well, which, is not the best. And there's some songs on here that are just flat out not good. One that comes to mind is Don't Tread on Me. That being said, I still think that overall this is a very solid album, and if you're trying to get into Metallica, this is one you should listen to. This album is really good as a tool for getting people into a heavier style music that aren't very familiar with it. If you just throw them to the wolves and give them Master of Puppets or something, they might not end up liking it. But if you give them some songs like Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters, and then show them an album like Master of Puppets, you can really make someone fall in love. So I think this album has a place. I think there is a reason that this album sold so well. Just for me personally, it's not one of my favorites or anything. I'm going to put the Black Album in B tier. I think it's pretty good, but it's not one of my favorites or anything. It's got some really good songs on it. It's got a decent amount of filler too, which isn't the best. But I kind of feel like this is the signal for what's coming with Metallica, because as you're going to see in part 2, these next few Metallica albums do get kind of rough, and this album on songs like Don't Tread on Me is where it starts to show. That being said, Nothing Else Matters, Enter Sandman, Holier Than Thou, The God That Failed, these are all great tracks, and overall this album is a net good. That's why I'm putting it in B tier. And people obviously love it. It wouldn't sell over 15 million copies if people didn't love it. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. That was a pretty long one where I discussed the first 5 Metallica albums. So that was part 1. Part 2 should be up sometime soon. I don't really have a schedule with these things. And in that one, I'm going to cover the later half of Metallica's career. So Load, Reload, Saint Anger, Death Magnetic, and Hardwired to Self-Destruct. So stay tuned for that. That one's not going to be quite as positive as this one was, but yeah, overall that's how I feel with Metallica, is their first block of stuff is their best. But if you want to see me shred into some albums and talk about some stuff I like too, then stay tuned for that video. Have a good one, guys. It's probably going to go on Christmas Day, so Merry Christmas as well, and have a good one.